In this video, I'm going to be breaking down episode 9 of Attack on Titan season 4, in which Eren completed his transformation from a one-legged hobo into an Instagram model. There's a lot to explain about this episode because a large portion of it was a flashback to 3 years ago, so I'll be talking about how all those scenes link into the present day of the series. Additionally, this video will cover other things that I thought were interesting, such as why Zeke and Eren have now been separated, the return of Annie, and why Yelena stole the Titan transformation serum from Marley. Let me know your thoughts on the episode in the comments down below, and be sure to stick around till the end as that's when I'll be giving my personal rating out of 10. Okay, so episode 9 was called Brave Volunteers, and it begins with Armin back on Paradis Island after they escaped from Marley in the last episode. We can see he's holding a conch in his hands, which was a prized possession that he acquired during their first visit to the sea in the final episode of season 3. That trip to the beach occurred in the year 851, and later that same year is when the flashbacks in this episode occurred. Present-day Armin reminisces about the first time Marley sent their survey ships to the island, and thanks to Pieck's words in the last episode, we already know that Yelena was part of that expedition. When the flashback starts, one of the Marleyan ships had already landed on the shore, but they hadn't been heard from for a while, so the other ship begins to approach. As they progress, they are ambushed by the attack titan, who appears out of the water and lifts this thing with his bare hands. This scene is a parallel to when Eren Kruger revealed his identity as the attack titan, as he also lifted a Marleyan ship on his back before breaking it in half. Admittedly though, Eren is probably carrying a heavier ship by the looks of it, so I'll allow him for not snapping it like Kruger did back then. Hanji was ecstatically waiting to greet the Marleyan soldiers, and I'll explain why the scouts were already prepared for Marley to arrive. To put it simply, after the events of last season, everyone on Paradis became aware that the world considered them to be an enemy. They knew that at some point in the near future, Marley would attempt to invade once again because the island is seen as an existential threat to humanity. As a result, they set up this camp near the ocean, with Armin and Eren serving as the defense against enemy invaders. When Marley finally arrived, Hanji's goal was to learn as much as possible about the outside world, which is information that only foreign soldiers would know. Back then, Armin was of a similar mindset to Hanji, as he saw an opportunity to gather information as well, and later believing that they could become friends if everyone got to know each other. Yeah, that didn't work out too well in the end. Anyway, Hanji greets the Marleyan soldiers, but next to her is another soldier from the first survey ship that went missing 2 hours earlier. This guy's name was Niccolo, and yeah, they were kind of threatening him with a sword behind his back in an attempt to kind of get the other Marleyan soldiers to cooperate. The idea was that Niccolo would play along with Hanji's routine, but as you can see, even with the threat of death, he still wasn't really up for it. Niccolo's hatred for Eldians is so ingrained that he literally wanted the captain to start firing, even though he himself would likely have been killed in the process. Looking at this opening scene, it made it all the more interesting to see later in the episode when Niccolo was mourning for an Eldian, but we'll get to that later. As the Marleyan captain prepared to fire, he was surprisingly assassinated on the spot by Yelena before she and her comrades turned their guns on their fellow Marleyan soldiers. Pieck revealed in the last episode that Yelena was a follower of Zeke, and here we find out exactly what that means. Within the Marleyan military, there are countless soldiers who are not actually Marleyans, but rather they are from nations that Marley has conquered. Both Yelena and Onyankopon are examples of these non-Marleyan soldiers, and as a result they have no real loyalty or allegiance to the country. When the first survey fleet left for Paradis Island, Zeke had already told Yelena to shoot her commanding officer if necessary, and to tell the leaders on Paradis what he's seeking to gain. However, before we get into what Zeke wants, there's a couple of things I should point out during this flashback. Number one is that Eren began to show his first signs of discontent in this scene when he points out that Paradis needs to do something to protect themselves. While Armin seemed optimistic about the future, Eren was concerned that Marley's military could destroy them in a real battle, and he reiterates that point later in the episode, insisting that Paradis needs something to stop other countries from attacking them. The second thing to point out is that during Yelena's initial meeting with Hanji and Levi, she foreshadows several things that we've already seen in the final season. For example, she mentions how Marley can't currently invade Paradis because they're at war with an alliance of other nations. The war that she's referring to is literally what this season began with, but as an audience we only got to see the end of it. She also introduces them to new technology such as the semi-automatic pistols, which is now standard equipment for the soldiers on Paradis. Another thing was when Onyankopon tried to explain the concept of aerial weapons, much to Hanji's amazement, and many years later he would be the one trusted to fly the airship during the battle in Marley. Moving on now, Yelena revealed 3 years ago that Zeke's true goal is to free the Eldian people, but he had 2 requests that needed to be fulfilled before he could achieve that. Zeke's first request was that he be accepted onto Paradis Island, and his second request was that he be introduced to the founding titan, aka Eren Yaeger. At this point in the timeline, Eren and Zeke are seemingly the only people who know how to use the full power of the Founding Titan. Naturally, a lot of people had seen Eren use the Founding Titan before, but he never actually told anyone how he was able to do it. In this episode, he finally reveals his secret and says he only concealed the truth to protect Historia, as obviously, if he told everyone, then it's possible she may have been turned into a Titan like Dinah Fritz. With the full power of the Founding Titan, Paradis would be able to activate the rumbling and defend themselves that way, but at this point in the story, we still don't know the full details of Zeke's secret plan. In this exact same scene in the manga, Zeke said that if his demands were met, he would guarantee the island's safety, provide them with the latest weapons, give them intelligence that would hurt Marley, and act as a middleman between Paradis Island and potential friendly nations around the world. It seems like a pretty good deal to get all of that just for bringing the guy to the island and then introducing him to Eren. But naturally, a lot of people were against the idea of, trusting this guy after he killed most of the Survey Corps. Despite her reservations, Hanji did decide that it was practical to work with the Marleyan volunteers, and thanks to the help of Yelena and Onyankopon, Paradis was able to neutralize 30 more Marleyan ships over the next 3 years. We know this because present-day Zeke already revealed that 32 ships in total had gone missing. Just before we continue, be sure to smash the like and sub buttons if you want to see more Attack on Titan breakdowns like this. Anyhow, Onyankopon and a few other volunteers helped to modernize the island by proposing the plans to construct a port. A port would enable Paradis to potentially trade with other nations in the future using the same ships that they'd captured from Marley. This scene was kind of funny because it showed us just how out of the loop the people on Paradis really are after 100 years of knowing nothing about the outside world. I say this because Sasha asks Onyankopon why his skin is dark, because if you think about it, there have been no black people on the island that we've been aware of, so it does make sense that she would ask this question. It was a combination of curiosity and ignorance, but Onyankopon smoothly answers by telling her that whoever created humanity thought it would be interesting to have different kinds of people in the world. As a side note regarding the port itself, we've previously seen that Paradis Island already does have a small port that was constructed decades ago, although that must have been on another part of the island. That port was made by Marley specifically so that they could turn aliens into Titans, so it doesn't exactly have the best history, but it's still there. The episode then progressed to an interesting moment involving Niccolo, which partly proves Armin's belief that Marleyans and Eldons can understand each other. Niccolo was the captive Marleyan soldier that was threatened by Levi in the beginning, and here we find out that he is also a chef. He was forced to prepare a feast of seafood, which Sasha mercilessly tears into, even to the point where she's crying real tears. Until this point, the chef had only shown a hatred for Eldians, but once he saw her enjoyment at his cooking, that hatred began to crack just a little bit. During these times, Armin really thought they could change something, as many Marleyans were able to overcome their prejudices against Eldians, when given sufficient time to do so. He believed that threatening the world with the rumbling was not something they had to do if they could just talk to other nations once the port was completed. However, being the pragmatist that he is, Eren wasn't really buying Armin's optimism, as most of the Marleyans who arrived on the island still hated the Eldian race. Eren knew that the world's perceptions of Eldians is hard to change, because whether they're good people or not, Eldians, at the end of the day, they're still human beings that can turn into these man-eating monsters. Getting the world to accept that after nearly 2,000 years of Titan domination was a pretty unrealistic goal. On top of all of that, Zeke only had a few years left to live at this point, so if they were going to bring him to Paradis Island, then that is also on a time limit. That's why 3 years later, Eren would eventually grow frustrated and begin his own plan to infiltrate Marley and get his brother back to the island. I thought this part was done really well when Eren was firing at the shooting range, only for the scene to transition into Sasha getting hit by a bullet. This was meant to symbolize that Sasha's death was Eren's fault, which is something that I think we've pretty much all accepted at this point. Present day Armin continues to talk to someone off screen and wonders if there was a different, more peaceful path they could have taken. The anime then gives us a small preview of Instagram model Eren before moving over to Mikasa at the cemetery. Niccolo had arrived to find out if Sasha really died, but was being physically abused by a random Eldian because Niccolo is a Marleyan volunteer. This is quite an ironic thing to happen considering the way that Eldians themselves are treated across the world, but it's yet another example that Eldians on Paradis can sometimes be no better than the people who oppress them. After spending the past 3 years on the island, Niccolo had affection towards Sasha and appreciated her love for his food. Unlike the version of himself that hated Eldians in the beginning, you can tell that he was truly devastated by this loss. Sasha's parents then show up, as well as this girl, who is the one that Sasha saved from a Titan after her village was destroyed. This was back in season 2 when the citizens of Connie's village were turned into Titans, and Sasha's heroics that day are the only reason this girl is still alive. Moving on, Eren and Zeke were immediately separated once they arrived on the island, as they can't yet be trusted to use the power of the Founding Titan. On the airship, these two were prevented from making contact, as Eren had his arms restrained and Zeke couldn't really do anything because his limbs were chopped off by Levi. Now that they're back on Paradis, Zeke was put under Levi's supervision and transported to this massive forest full of trees. We saw before how the Jaw Titan is the only one that's really able to take advantage of this environment, and when it comes to the Beast Titan, there's really not much he can do. There are no rocks around, not to mention that there's a ton of space for the scouts to maneuver with their ODM gear. Zeke is being kept here until they decide what they're going to do with him, but in the meantime he does seem to show some concern for Gabby and Falco. Those two had already been locked up in prison since arriving on the island, so not much to say regarding that, other than that Gabby is clearly organizing her one-person kill list in her head. The next thing I need to explain relates to the anti-Marley volunteers, as it's been no secret since the beginning that they were working for Zeke the whole time. With the man himself now arriving on the island, Commander Pieck decides to have these guys restrained so that they can't make an effort to communicate with him. Luckily for them, Yelena doesn't take it too personally, and the Titan transformation serum that you see on the table was stolen by her from Marley. You may be wondering why Paradis Island would even need such a thing, and the simple answer is that they may need this serum in the future so that when it's time to eat Eren or to eat Zeke, they'll be able to create pure Titans capable of doing so. I'm not saying they're going to eat Eren or Zeke right now, but eventually one day they're going to need to eat them before the Curse of Ymir kills them, so it's necessary for the future of the island. In a dimly lit room, Armin continues to talk with someone off screen. As he continues speaking, the camera pans to reveal the person he's been talking to this whole episode was none other than Annie Leonheart, aka the female Titan. Annie is still encased inside this crystal after 4 years and is seemingly in an unconscious state. It's a good thing she doesn't need to eat or drink whilst inside this thing, otherwise she would have died a long time ago. At first glance, it might appear strange that Armin is taking time to, speak to the unconscious body of someone who betrayed them all, but there is actually a couple of good reasons why he would do this. Firstly, Armin succeeded Bertolt as the Colossal Titan, and whilst he might not be able to see Bertolt's memories, it's possible that Bertolt's feelings may be influencing Armin instead. We know that Armin's predecessor had a long-standing crush on Annie, so it's possible that, that crush is the reason Armin is drawn to talk to her. Additionally, Armin feels guilty for what the scouts did in Marley, and Annie is a great person to talk to this about, as she basically did the same thing just to Paradis instead. The episode ends with Mikasa still in the cemetery, and she repeats a phrase that Eren once said to her when they were kids. Back then, Eren saved her life by killing 2 human traffickers that were planning to sell her, but the third kidnapper managed to grab him by the neck. In this moment, he told Mikasa to fight, because if they don't fight then they can't win, and if they don't win then they're gonna die. Eren's words helped Mikasa to activate her Ackerman powers, turning her into the super soldier that she is today. In my opinion, the reason Mikasa repeats this phrase at this moment is to reassure herself that Sasha didn't die in vain, and that the fight against Marley was necessary to ensure their survival. At the same time, Eren fixes his hair into a not so stylish man bun and tells his reflection to fight, almost like he's trying to psych himself up for something that's yet to come. With that said, that was my breakdown of episode 9 of Attack on Titan season 4. This was a really solid episode, and I kind of appreciated the way they rearranged certain things when compared to the manga. To me, the flashbacks were a lot less confusing than they might have been, so yeah, they really did a good job in the pacing and also the organization of the flashbacks. Overall, this episode gets an 8 out of 10. As usual, I'd appreciate if you dropped a like on this video and share it with any Attack on Titan fans who you think might not understand what happened in this episode. Thanks for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.